Happy Friday, the 13th. I'm not at all one of those people that cares about that day, but a lot of the news was talking about it. So happy Friday for everybody from South Africa to Atlanta to Gulfport, Mississippi, where one of our speakers, Nina, is from. I'm so excited to have this session of Close Distributed, which is led by CEO and founder of Rural Sourcing, Monty Hamilton. Monty has been so gracious to be the keynote, gosh, probably Dallas. I think you were with us in Dallas, Monty, and then you were with us last year, and just one of the greatest motivational speakers that I have been lucky enough to listen to. I read on LinkedIn about 6 months ago about a new initiative that Rural Sourcing was launching, and I asked Monty to join us and to speak about that. Rural Sourcing has offices all over the country, and Monty has made a commitment from the beginning to train a non-traditional workforce to move into the IT field. So Monty, it's so great to have you, Michael, and Nina join us. And again, thank you for your time and for being part of the Close-It community.
Thank you, Jemai. I appreciate that introduction. And as always, I'm excited to be here. It's a privilege and something that I've been able to look forward to the last couple of years. And I'll keep my fingers crossed that, you know, when we get back together in person next year, I'll get another invite. So just putting my plug in now. So thanks again, and welcome to everyone who's joining the Zoom call today from wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our efforts at Rural Sourcing as it relates to equity, inclusion, and diversity. From incidentally good to intentionally great. That's our mantra when it comes to EI&D. That's our rallying cry. That's what we are trying to become. We know we're not there yet, but we have big plans and big goals to be able to one day claim that we are intentionally great when it comes to EI&D. And a real treat, I think, for you all today is that you won't have to listen to me this whole time. We have invited two of my colleagues here, Michael White and Nina Ladner, who are chairs of our EI&D Council. And I'm excited for you to have the opportunity to get to hear from their point of view, what they're doing, what they're working on, what their struggles have been, what their successes have been. And so I think after I get through and set the table here a little bit, we'll get into the fun part of this thing. So I do want to set that table just a little bit and give you some idea of the history of where we've been, where we are on this journey, and kind of hopefully lay out some idea of where we eventually want to get to that promised land of being intentionally great. The EI&D efforts at Rural Sourcing really got started at a grassroots level. There was a group of Black women in our Mobile, Alabama center, of which Nina Ladner, one of our guests today, is one of those who spearheaded that effort. And it really started as, I would say, a employee resource group to help support each other, to be there for each other, and also to educate the other colleagues in that office and across our company on what it was like to be a minority in the workforce. But they didn't stop there. They also began a community outreach program, and they worked with an elementary school locally in an underserved neighborhood in Mobile, Alabama, and they were able to raise money for and pack and distribute over 400 book bags in the past year to allow those students to start school off in a way that would help them be successful. They also adopted a middle school robotics team, again, from an underserved neighborhood in Mobile. And they mentored that group and they coached that group. And they even brought that group into our offices in Mobile, which is a really beautiful office, to allow those folks to be able to see what a career in technology might look like. and to be able to see someone who looked like them working in high tech and having fun while they were doing it. Nina and her group also started and created our first ever Juneteenth celebration back in June of 2019. And it was an awesome event. They involved a lot of the community groups. They had music, they had arts and crafts, they had an educational program, and it was just a fantastic celebration, and also a way to educate the rest of our community and our organization on the history of Juneteenth. They also held a watch party, which I got to participate in briefly in Mobile, for the movie Hidden Figures. And they didn't just stop there. They then had discussion forums after that movie to allow small groups to get together and talk about what their aha moments were and what they realized after watching that movie. So that's where our EI&D efforts got started, really at this grassroots level with a group of Black women in Mobile, Alabama. Now, the rest of the organization began to take notes, and folks in Atlanta, my team, began to ask ourselves, why can't we scale this now across our other 6 centers and across our entire enterprise to be able to take what Nina and that team of folks have done and broaden it out further. And so we began to think about and plan for how we would do that this past year. Now, one of the things as I was putting my notes together for this discussion today, I couldn't help but keep coming back to this analogy of going to see your physician for that annual checkup. Now, I don't know about you all, but when I see that on my calendar and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and closer, I get more anxious and more nervous with each passing day. Because I know when I go to see my physician, she's going to say, Monty, you know, you need to eat better. You need to get more exercise. You need to stop doing some of these bad habits that you've accumulated over the many years. And so I know that's going to be a part of that discussion. But I know that if I listen to her and I take that advice, I'm going to be healthier. I'm going to be better for that advice. And so likewise, I think when we started out on this journey, we realized that we needed to take a good hard look at ourselves and figure out where we are today. And then paint that vision for where we want to be in the future, for that promised land of being intentionally great. Now, just like going to the physician, I think oftentimes we need an objective outside voice to help us to see where we are and take a true objective assessment of where we are today. And so we were able to do that. We found a consultant here based in Atlanta. Her name is Jackie Parker. Jackie comes from a very successful career in corporations, first as a brand manager at Nabisco and some other large brands. She then got into inclusion and diversity work, and she led the inclusion and diversity efforts at Russell Athletic here in Atlanta. And then she went on to run and become the president of the Community and Philanthropy Foundations at Newell Rubbermaid and eventually at General Motors. 2 very big jobs. But Jackie decided that she thought she could have a bigger impact on her own if she left that corporate world and began to help companies like Rural Sourcing understand how we could make an impact in the equity inclusion world. And so we enlisted Jackie's help, frankly, to help us understand where we were, to help us then draft our mission and vision and guiding principles of where we wanted to be. And I think anytime you are willing to do this and take that assessment of where you are and paint that vision, you have to be willing to hear the things when you don't want to hear those things, right? I think that's where we were 18 months ago. And listen, I want to be very transparent. I want to be very clear and forthright with you all today. If some of you are out there Googling rural sourcing and you pull up the website and you look at our board of directors and you look at our leadership team, you may be saying to yourself, hey, Monty, you sound like the biggest hypocrite in the world. Because if you look at those teams, it's primarily male and it's primarily white. But we are making progress. And what I would hope, if you got to know us better, you would then see, if you looked a little further down off that one page on the website, you would see across our software development centers, we have a development center director. And those development center directors are directly responsible for the health and well-being and the work environment of 600 of our colleagues. And out of that group of people, about 40% would identify as being in a minority category. And then if you look further than that, you looked at where there are significant minority populations in our centers, such as Mobile, Alabama, Augusta, Georgia, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, you'd find in those places that over 20% of our colleague population in Mobile and Augusta would identify as being Black. And likewise in Albuquerque, you would see that over 20% of our colleagues there would identify as being Latinx. And so we have done some of these things, I would say, and we've incidentally done okay or even good, but we're a long way from being intentionally great. We're a long way, and we know we've got work to do. As we did that recent survey, one of the other kind of aha moments for me, frankly, was that over 20% of our high-tech worker population identified as having some disability. Now, whether that was on the autism spectrum or having some speech impediment, it was a wide range of stuff. But that was really a surprising statistic, frankly, for me. And I'm the dad of 2 special needs kids, so I get a little bit about this world. But the fact that we've not been intentional about going and hiring folks with disabilities, but the fact that we've incidentally done good there, I think speaks to the kind of culture and the welcoming environment that we have and that we've created, such that those folks with a disability feel like they can come to work and be who they are. And I think that's a good starting point. So back to our story with Jackie and our health checkup. So she helped us lay out our mission, our vision, our guiding principles, some of which I think are just awesome, right? One of those things is to steal from a former president, President Obama, which is if you can do the job, you should get the job. Another one is putting the I back in team. And in this case, that I stands for inclusion, to making sure that we are building inclusive teams across all of our organization. And so Jackie was instrumental in helping us lay out those things and put a framework in place so that we then, and now our responsibility is to make sure that we are beginning to put the right practices and programs and other activities in place so that we can become a healthier, better organization. And so when Jackie was here, I think, she would say that she found that, we had been feasting, frankly, from the same old set of college recruiting grounds that we'd always gone to. And we needed to introduce some diversity into that diet. I think the other thing that she would say is that, we had some inclusion muscles, but we needed to exercise those a lot better and a lot more across everything that we do. And finally, she would say that you've got some habits that you've fallen into that you just need to stop. You need to quit those things now. And their habits, as we look back now, are things that we just started doing without thinking about them as we were a young, growing, fast-growing company. And we didn't get out of them. We didn't recognize them until we brought a professional in to help us see those things. And so we started on this journey now. And I think one of the things that, and I'll wrap up with this, is that it's helpful when you're trying to get to that other side of being intentionally great to have models out there that you can look to and borrow from, as we'd like to say in the corporate world. And last year at this conference, I told a story about a friend of mine, Randy Lewis, who's now a retired executive from Walgreens. And Walgreens recently scored a 100% top score on the Equality Inclusion Index. And so they're a great model for us to look to and see how they're doing things and what they're doing. But last year I told the story about Randy Lewis, and Randy, before he retired, one of his last big success stories there at Walgreens was he set up a new distribution center in Anderson, South Carolina. And when Randy went to do that, he had a mandate from himself that 1 out of every 4 employees hired in that distribution center would be someone from the disability community. Now, Randy hadn't done a whole lot of research, frankly. He didn't know if that community was even big enough to support that, because that's close to 200 people that he would have to hire from the disability community. But he didn't let that get in his way. He just said, we're going to go do this. Now, the great part of that story today is that that distribution center that Randy went to Anderson, South Carolina and built out and found those 200 employees from the disability community to hire and put to work there, that distribution center is one of the very top performing distribution centers in all of the Walgreens network. So it can be done, and it can be a success when we put our minds to it. And so Walgreens serves as one of those great models for us as we try to move from this world of incidentally good to intentionally great. So, as I said before, it's my pleasure to get to ask some questions and put a couple of my colleagues on the hot seat here today, if you will. And I want to introduce them first, and then I'll let them tell you a little bit more about who they are as people as they work here at Rural Sourcing. Michael White is VP of Sales for us here in the Atlanta office. Mike is a graduate of Morehouse College. He started out his professional career as a labor union organizer. And Mike shared a few stories with me from those days. I know that's a tough job. Mike and I found each other close to 10 years ago now, and he was my first sales hire here at Rural Sourcing. And I would agree with Mike said this. He's the only successful sales hire I've ever had in my entire career. So I am excited to hear what Mike has to say today. And then Nina Ladner, who I mentioned earlier, she was a driving force, I would say an unstoppable force probably, in creating the original grassroots efforts in Mobile, Alabama, to start what we're doing today. Nina is a graduate of Southern Mississippi. She lives over in Gulfport, just a short drive away from our Mobile office. Nina started her career actually working at U.S. Coast Guard. And then she moved on to become a bench chemist. And that's kind of how we crossed paths with Nina, that she was working on a laboratory information management system. We were looking for some of those skill sets, and she joined us at that point in time. Now, over the years, Nina has been promoted several times. She's a senior delivery manager now for us, which means she is the person that has to make sure that whatever Mike goes out there and promises on his sales role, Nina has to deliver on the back end of that. So I'm excited to have both of those folks with us today. So Nina, let me just turn it over to you first. I'm going to take a seat and go through my questions, but maybe just tell us a little bit about your background. I didn't give all the secrets away, and who you are.
Okay. My name is Nina Ladner. Like Monty said, I am right now in Gulfport, Mississippi. I say right now because I am a military veteran and a military spouse now. So I basically follow my husband. And right now we got to come back to Gulfport, Mississippi, which is where we're both from, which is nice. We have 4 daughters who I think that I like to coach in soccer on a regular basis, although I've never played soccer in my life. Started with RSI about 5 years ago. I will say, with no shame, this is the longest time I've stayed in one place for a career, and that speaks volumes because I get bored pretty easily. Monty has somehow created a company where getting bored is not a thing that I can easily do. Always a new challenge, always something fun to do, and I work with some of the best people around. I would say that Mike is one of those people, but I don't want him to feel too good about himself before he has to speak. So But I'll pass it on. That's really a lot about me.
Cool. Well, thank you, Nina. Mike, you want to give us a little bit more background and setup for yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Good talking with everybody this morning. So I'm originally from the Northeast, out of Massachusetts. I continually to move further down south, New York to Atlanta. Came to college at Morehouse, like Monty said. Our RSI has been a great opportunity for me. So I was sold on the company from Monty, looking at Monty's passion for the business, the good that he wanted to do, create a number of jobs in the U.S., and also given someone like me who frankly didn't have the deep background to selling into IT services, right? He saw something in me, maybe the competitiveness, my will to win and achieve, and really kind of I think the family background, like in connection, I could tell he really cared about people. So that resonated with me, and it made me even want to, I'm internally motivated, but it also motivated me to prove him right by bringing me on. So throughout World Sourcing, I know I started with that. I've been able to not only kind of come on, be successful in sales, but also develop additional skill sets. Whether I think my leadership, the opportunities I had to add to that, go to that, the different people I've been able to network with, different exposure or different responsibilities I wasn't really aware of. And then also with this EID Council, right? This is something that has been very important to me because one thing that I would maybe want to really be a part of this and kind of be a main focal point to push is because we started it before a lot of the things in 2020, took place. This was something that they were intentional about. The strategy was talked about way before that, right? So to be able to come on and kind of have our first meetings with Jackie and already have the council taking place to incorporate some things within the centers, I think that was important to me because from top down, from Monty, his executive leadership team, and also kind of to myself and different colleagues in the centers, we know that it was important, right? And everyone is held accountable no matter what level with this intentional focus. So the key is I want people to feel how I do, right? Celebrated versus tolerated. And I think that's a big thing, like within the centers. That's what I felt, and I want that to resonate with everybody in the center so they feel as empowered as I have during my journey.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, Nina, maybe just tell us a little bit about the work of the EID Council and your particular role there as you're responsible as the chair for our workplace.
So I guess a little background of where we started in Mobile. A lot of this was really we have two options with EID, I think. You can be a part of the problem or you can be a part of the solution. And one of the things that I really wanted to do, again, following Monty's mission and seeing how passionate he is about putting people first, was seeing how I could continue to support his mission and rally with people around me that felt the same way to be intentional about being better, to doing better things. So that's really how we got started. We didn't want to continuously complain, say, this isn't working or this isn't working. We wanted to be a part of bringing about a solution if we did have a complaint. One of the really good things about working with RSI is when we spoke up, people were listening. And not only were they listening, and this is executive leadership, they were also reactive. And eventually that turned to them being proactive, which is where we are now. So as chair of our EID Workplace Committee, a lot of what I focus on as the chair is continuing to create an equitable workplace and looking at those things. So not looking from an HR perspective, but really looking more from we're already doing good things, but what can we be doing better to bring about change? Is it training? Is it conversations? Is it making sure that everyone is transparent and everyone's getting enough information? And then trying to put some really measurable goals. One of the most difficult things about EI&D is measurable goals. There's a lot of, I think, qualitative things that you will see. People will change, behaviors will change, people will be more open. But I think when it comes to those quantitative measurements, it gets a little more difficult. But we have gotten really intentional and setting some goals. So things like, as Monty said, we started out very much like an employee resource group. One of the things we don't do at RSI is refer to the people that we work with as employees. They're our colleagues. So we have intentionally created very strategic colleague resource groups. And in these groups, we have missions, we have goals, we have a sort of support system, we have some camaraderie, and we have things that we want to implement that will not only work for us as a workplace, but also things that will work for our future colleagues that come along. So that's one of the main things that we've been focused on in addition to training. We've realized that a lot of discussions and issues that we have around EI&D aren't always coming from a place of hate. Oftentimes they're coming from a place of lack of understanding or ignorance. And we truly can't expect people to understand what they haven't experienced or what we haven't given them an opportunity to look into. So a lot of what we've intentionally done as the workplace is we're trying to focus on things and not make them negative. We want to talk about privilege, but we want to talk about how we can elevate that privilege, how we can use it for good. We want to talk about biases, but we want to make sure that you understand that that's not because you're a bad person. There's a lot of different things that go into biases, but we want to break that down and we want to reevaluate how we can go about being better people in general. So just making sure that we're not putting a negative connotation and calling anyone out, but that we're actively looking for ways to grow together. And I think at the end of the day, that also includes going into the community and growing our communities because we are better people from what we're learning in our work community.
Well, thank you, Nina. And Mike, a little bit, so you're the overall committee chair. What are the things that you're feeling the weight of responsibility for as that role?
To make sure everybody is heard. So I think one thing in stressing patience in order to see progress. I think that's been a really big thing as working with the colleagues and understanding their concerns. A lot of them, whether even prior history before RSI, they might have seen some things, maybe heard some lip service from different executives, different companies, and nothing ever really happened. So they might take some of that past experience here. So if they don't maybe see us moving fast enough with certain things, they think we're not really doing anything. So I think that has been kind of a key thing that I constantly think about in ways to more so I try to duplicate and replicate what you do, Monty. Open door policy. So everyone in the council, people reach out to them individually. And I think the more that they've seen our face, the more that we've posted. We have a monthly newsletter that we leverage, just talk about what we're doing. The more we utilize Slack, the more visible maybe I am. They've been able to reach out, feel a little more comfortable and confident in me, kind of what I'm doing, and just overall objectives of the council, right? So it's a full-time job that I'm not necessarily able to give full-time hours to right now. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in just having that kind of the ear of the executive team has been helpful, but it is definitely a full-time job. I've been able to understand some of maybe the blockers that I had as well. Being remote, like COVID, everyone has been remote, but that's, my role, that's what I've been anyway, right? I'm not working in the center. So being able to get a good view of the colleagues, what they're going through in the centers, it's helped me understand maybe some potential blockers that I might've had, things that I haven't been seeing. So it's helped me grow and really kind of be able to work with people within the centers to present to the executive team to get this to get certain things we need to do incorporated and improve upon our strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And whoever wants to take this first is fine. But and you sort of alluded to this, Michael, about being an open door policy. But what things has the EID Council done to make sure that we have an open, communicative environment in general across the organization?
Nina, you go take that one.
Oh, sure. So one of the first things that we created, one of the good things about COVID is we have been forced to be more communicative on our social channels, which we use Slack. We started with an open, inclusive channel. It's actually called the Inclusion Community. This is a no judgment zone on Slack where we get in there and we ask questions, we share articles, we talk about current events, we talk about the positives and the negatives, and we allow people to have full-on conversations and ask questions and give suggestions without judgment. And that has been really helpful in creating some trust and opening some doors for us to be able to have deeper discussions and kind of guide those discussions towards more training. Our newsletter that we send out monthly is actually, our basis around that newsletter is anti-racism. So not only are we giving the most up-to-date articles that we find or guidance on training that we find online, but we're also thinking about our families. We're all remote, so we're doing a lot from home. So even in our newsletter, there's a small portion for these are the things that we suggest you talk to your kids about. Here are some really great resources to talk to your kids. Like Monty said, we have a very white leadership team. One thing that we've done to really engage that leadership team is they're doing the work, and we're making sure that as the Inclusion Council that we're supporting them doing the work and looking past their outward appearance and saying, hey, there's way many more parts to these people. So we're doing a spotlight. They're reading articles, they're reading books, they're giving feedback, they're telling our colleagues how their minds have changed. So those are some of the really big, I think, pieces that we've put out there that are opening up this communication.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Anything to add there, Mike, to that?
We just continually remind all the 600 plus colleagues that the council is mainly, we're facilitators to the strategy, for the overall strategy of the company. So we're all responsible, right? You know, to carry out the mission and action items associated with council. I think that's just something that we want to continue to reiterate within the team and the company.
Okay. So let's move into maybe a little bit more brass tacks. And I alluded to this when I talked about the fact that we've been feasting off of recruiting from the same old places that we've always gone to. What steps are we taking today to be able to introduce some more diversity into that candidate pool?
One of the steps was we immediately revised some of the job descriptions, right, to have more inclusive language. We've also started posting in different diverse recruiting job boards, where we've been able to definitely try to tap into and take advantage, honestly, of the fact that since we all are 100% remote now, it's not necessarily having to focus in areas just where our centers are. So if we have centers that don't necessarily have a high minority population, we're able to look elsewhere, kind of throughout the country. And what we're finding is a lot of people actually do want to, when things return back to like our new normal, they're looking to relocate. We actually have someone on one of the teams that now that we started engaging with who's going to relocate towards one of our centers, right? So they're just looking for that opportunity. And, you know, what else kind of on, I know with your team, you've looked into a couple other things too, besides the kind of the job board, changing job boards, inclusive language there. What are some of the other things that you're seeing?
I was actually going to mention that we have updated our job descriptions, but we've also kind of gone about and updated our inclusive statement, our equal opportunity statement, to make sure that we're branching out as far as we can, to make sure that when people are reading these job descriptions, that they are seeing, they're seeing that basically we have no boundaries. We're not asking you to leave any part of yourself at home. We're saying bring your whole self to work. We've talked a lot about focusing and not directly through workplace, but through community, looking directly at our HBCUs and trying to understand how do we get a pipeline directly out of these historically Black colleges and universities to come directly to us. We know that the talent exists. Now it's just demystifying the fact that there is a pipeline problem, but truly redesigning that pipeline so that it's coming directly to us. So we're still brainstorming on some of those areas, but I will say that we are making some progress. And updating those job descriptions was really a strong move to move towards more inclusive language and to make sure that we weren't, everything is not so race related, but making sure we weren't doing anything that was hurting our gender or creating a gender bias. So just looking at that language with a really inclusive lens and making sure that the things that we were saying were intentional and inclusive.
Yeah, it's a great point, Nina. And I mentioned earlier in my statements that, outside folks were helpful, and then some inside folks as well, to help us really think about the messages, the subtle messages, the unintended messages we were sending out there. And so one of our recruiting lines used to be, hey, the picture of people with their shoes off underneath the desk, right? And it said, come kick your loafers off. Guess what? Women don't really wear loafers, and so we were blind to that. So that was one of those habits that we just had to stop doing, right? So talk to me a little bit about, through this process, we've been at it for, well over a year now. What things have you learned that have been maybe aha moments for you all?
I'll start out here, and I'll start with the one that maybe resonates loudest to me. I am really passionate about DID, and I am probably one of the most strong-willed people that I know. But what I've learned through this process is that passion and will, they don't equate to time and energy specifically for this role. There's a lot of emotional labor that comes with being a person of color and leading this effort. There's teaching and there's feeling, and we have realized along the way, and I think Mike mentioned it earlier, it's really difficult full-time job in a part-time position. So there's a lot of things that you want to get done. There's a lot of follow-up that you want to get done, but there's just not always enough time to get it done. And it's also understanding your balance with other portions of the organization, making sure that your relationship with your HR team is a partnership and not a gatekeeping or a oversight. You have to understand from the beginning that you will work directly with HR, but you will work with them in a partnership. There are things that EI&D cannot do, but there are things that HR tends to make way too stringent and way too legal that doesn't create the trust that an inclusion council can bring. I think those are two of the biggest things. Everything else kind of, your team formation really becomes very organic. I can say when we first put together the council, it was like, I've never worked with these people. I don't know how to communicate, but it's one of those things where I guess it's exactly what inclusion is supposed to be. You start having conversations, you realize who these people are, you realize how much you have in common as opposed to how much difference there is. And then within the next few hours, you're talking about your whole life with people that you just met 5 minutes ago, because you realize once we sat down and we were completely uninhibited and we had a conversation, we realized how alike we were to have these conversations. So I'll say those are some of the big things. There's a lot of emotional labor that will go on. And I say that because I'm a person of color, but I don't know what it's like to not be a person of color and to have these conversations. So that emotional tax may be great on everyone. I will say there's also disillusion that comes along with just what and I say we as people of color are going through. Kind of when things happen in the world, I think it's difficult for everyone to realize that it's also happening directly to us in that moment. And there's going to have to be some patience and understanding and time that lets us be able to perform two roles, to work through personally what's happening, but also to come out and still be a leader and say, I see this is happening, but we're still about progress here.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, just one thing to add, just unintentionally alienating others. I think that's been something that I've come across and learned from, kind of just by being part of the council. When to Nina's point, some more conversations, getting to know everyone. For example, in the use of pronouns, the correct pronouns. for colleagues. I've been during this process, a number of us have been educated on that, seeing how important that is. When I first started, and just because I am a Black man, when I thought diversity, I was just thinking Black, white, race. There's a lot of different things within that makes everyone diverse, whether age, gender, sexual identification. And so there's a lot of things in that, and it's been a learning experience for me. And it's just certain words that you say or things that you don't say says a lot to other people, right? So I think by taking strong stances against racism, against any discrimination, outwardly and openly, says a lot. By not saying stuff, even though you don't agree with it, and not defending someone, that says just as much. So I think that's something just within this process. It's been very important for me and in a lot of other people to learn and just be mindful of.
Yeah, great point, Mike. And as phrased, I think something goes like, the sound of your silence is overwhelmingly deafening, right? So you can communicate a lot through inaction as well. Hey, so maybe Mike, you want to kick this one off too, and talk a little bit about what we're doing to ensure that these principles, these practices, the cultural fabric of what we're trying to build here doesn't go away with tomorrow, right? That it's lasting and sustainable.
Yeah, we're documenting everything, for one, and we're not just doing it within the centers. So Ingrid Miller, our CEO, is also executive sponsor who sits in all the meetings. Our head of HR, Anna Lucero, is also in all the meetings as well. So there's things that we're, other than just kind of setting it within our individual committee groups, they're becoming standard within, whether it's indoctrination into the employee handbook, whether it's adding bias interrupter surveys and also trainings for new hires. That's something that a list on that's going to be required as we bring on additional colleagues, and we're starting to set different time periods where each colleague already in the workplace has to take these same surveys and also trainings, right? So this is to make sure that no matter who's in place within the council, that this is going to be something that just becomes the fabric of RSI, right? So it's some of the things that we've taken upon ourselves to, some of us have already done trainings, right? So now it's actually going to be required from all levels, whether it's kind of your level, Monty, kind of the executive level, down to different tech leads in the center, down to new colleagues also. So those are some of the steps that we have taken, continue to take. And by having kind of that executive sponsorship back in leadership, it's being documented and part of really the guidelines for the company versus kind of just some things that we're trying to unintentionally maybe work towards.
Yeah. Nina, anything to add to that in terms of kind of sustainability?
I will say that we're trying to be more focused on our senior leadership. So we're looking to take a step down from the executive leadership, but also not encumber our new hires, and look at that senior leadership as being a full-on, even though the whole company is an extension of the council, we're looking at senior leadership to be ones that push these efforts. They have a lot of influence. They also have some tenure with the company. They know what our culture was like in the development centers, so they're able to encompass all these things. So we're looking to work directly with that senior leadership to be champions for inclusion as we continue to move forward with training and surveys, just to make sure that not only do they feel engaged, but also that they're learning, since they are so impactful on our other colleagues.
Right. Cool. But one of the things that, the company from the get-go has been built around our three pillars of colleagues, clients, and community. And so talk to me a little bit about what the EI&D is doing to make sure that we're not only focusing on ourselves and how we get better and we get healthier, but how we help our communities get healthier as well.
Nina, you've been very intentional kind of on that within the community. Talk about some of the things that we've done kind of as a company, not just Mobile, that you've exposed the rest of the company to some of your efforts as well within the community. I think that's important to highlight.
I think across the board, we've all done a lot of focus on where our centers are located. And I have to give that credit completely to Monty. So we are in downtown areas, which are usually surrounded by underserved communities. So in each of our development centers, although we started out in Mobile with reaching out and inviting these students in to see a day in the life, I know that multiple development centers across our entire company have done the same thing, bringing these children in, showing them people that look like them, giving them better skills. We have connected with other schools that aren't able to bring their students in. There's a lot of resourcing issues that come with getting your students to the school, but we've been able to take some of our colleagues out to those schools and do an hour of code at the school. We've even gone as far as to bring teachers in for a work day where the teachers sit with our developers and they learn how to engage their students in these underserved communities. We've looked for alternate pathways. So we've connected with, we have partnerships with people who aren't necessarily looking for a college pathway, but they do want to get into technology. So we've connected with them to make sure that we're looking in all the areas. And then there's the nice fun things that we do. We donate book bags. We look for opportunities to buy lunch. You know, sometimes it's not the money that you donate, but it's the time and the thought that counts. So we try to make sure that when it comes to the community, that we are being more thoughtful too.
So let me highlight that specific there where you said the lunch, Nina. So Juneteenth started out in Mobile, became a company-wide event this year. We were able to do that virtually, but Nina was a key part in identifying different organizations within the cities that our centers are in and donating lunch. So we identified some, ordered lunch for them, but specifically from Black businesses in the area. So Monty gave approval also for all the colleagues in our center, if they ordered lunch from a Black restaurant, in Uber, we talked and had a partnership with Uber as well, that our side took care of that, right? So that was a way to not only expose all the colleagues to different Black restaurants in the area that they might not have even known about, also gave that business and exposure to those specific restaurants. At the same time, we were all able to donate meals throughout the number of organizations within our communities, right? So that was something that I know I was very proud of, and Nina, I have to definitely praise her for that. She was a big part of that and pulled me into some conversations as well. So that was, I think, a very big, successful kind of community-wide, company-wide event that we had. So we did a lot of good there.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And I saw one question pop up in the chat. Is that personal employee funds or those company funds? And those are company-funded efforts. So I'll ask one more question of each of you, and then maybe we'll have some time, Tiffany, for any questions from our audience, or at least a couple of them. So my last question for each of you is, given what you know now, been at this for a little bit, working on it, what advice would you give to others who may be starting out earlier in this journey or somewhere else in this journey?
So I'll jump out here and I'll use a Montyism. I'll give you kind of how I see EI&D from an analogy. I think you have to think about this like a tree. You start with an acorn, and it takes a lot to get an acorn to become an oak tree. There's going to be watering, there's going to be pruning. There's going to be times where you actually think it's dead and not growing, but you have to play the long game with EI&D. And you have to realize that it's going to continue going on past you. And that's what you're planning for, is truly the future of that growth. So my main point is it's all about patience and going back and reiterating those steps to make sure that what you did the last time, that you grow a little bit on that last step for improvement. And even when you think that you've reached the end of an objective where you can check it off, it doesn't really work that way for EI&D. You may check off a checkbox because let's be honest, there is a return on investment that we can measure for inclusion. But at the end of the day, you still want to keep growing on that same objective because you learn so much along the way. While you're trying to talk about, for example, we talked about implicit bias training. We were going to specifically teach people not to be biased. Well, as we went down that road, we realized, but that's not enough. We need some interrupters to understand that this is what you should be doing, not that you shouldn't be doing it. This is more what you should be doing. So that little effort of that one branch of our tree turned into a much larger branch of, oh, we now need to look at training for all of these specific parts. So I think it's just understanding that you may start with something small, but it's going to continue to grow. And if you have to cut back some pieces and go in a different direction, that's not a failure. That's just redirecting, but you're still going towards that end goal.
Yeah, only thing I would add there, Nina, thank you, is make it specific towards your company. What works maybe at one company, depending on size and kind of how everything is structured, might not work at, like a startup or a younger company, right? So I think you have to, depending on kind of the workforce that you have there and kind of where you are as far as kind of diversity efforts, leadership, it could be structured probably a little differently with still same underlying principles. Keep that in mind, remain agile. In this point, things come up that you might have to change, right? So you might have to tweak certain action items, different goals. Like COVID, we changed a few things, made some of the community events that we're going to have in person, change that to virtually. So organize that and structure that a little differently, right? So I think just remaining agile, have backing from your executive leadership, because that's very important. That allows us to have a voice and our voices to be heard, right? So by having that from top down, them 100% on board and making sure everybody below is accountable, that helps really kind of get a lot of the strategy adhered to within the company.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Nina. I appreciate that. Tiffany or Jemai, we've got 5 minutes left, so thought we'd open it up for any other questions from our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. There's a lot of questions I have, but I can't hog it. So Merritt Lee asked a question, and I'm going to just tweak it a little bit because you addressed some of it. They have a high growth startup company, and I want to know, she says, I want to know what you could have done early on to avoid the pitfalls that we're going to have to look out for. So it's kind of like, the way I address that is, you've got a big ship now. If you were starting over, what could you do as a startup to approach this differently? It's a big question.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's a great question, by the way. And I think the reality is you can choose your what you want to be hard, right? If you want this to be really, really hard down the road, then you can ignore these things and maybe go to where it's easy to recruit people and go to your own networks and the people and your co-founders that already know each other. The reality is, I'm no different than this. Those folks are going to look a lot like me, right? Older, white, male. But if we decide now to do the hard thing, which is let's go figure out where that talent is in other places that we wouldn't normally knee-jerk reaction go look in, then that will make it much easier down the road. That would be one. And I think just the fact that you're cognizant of it now, I mentioned earlier, we fall into habits so easily, right? Whether it's recruiting from the same schools or, pulling practices that we had from our previous employers that work there, but that, make no sense here in this given time, right? So I think those are some of the things just to be cognizant of. And the last thing I would add is that, bring in some counsel, whether that's paid professional advice or someone you can just trust who's going to give you a really, really honest, truthful answer to your questions.
Thank you. Gerald Solomon, who is working with esports education, wondered if you all knew Ryan Johnson in Atlanta at CX Community. Nope.
don't.
I do not, but I'll make sure to go
Yeah.
stalk him on LinkedIn and find out.
I'll have Gerald reach out to you and give you the information.
Yeah,
Any
that'd be great.
other questions? I think we addressed, one of the questions was that if you go to your website, it is white male loafers. No, I added the loafers.
Right.
But you did address that, and I think you addressed it beautifully. So I think that is something that people are trying to figure out. So I'm going to close with the question I asked, which was, do you think you'll provide a toolkit that other businesses could use? I mean, I personally have been looking at, diversity and inclusion across corporate America, and it needs a whole redesign. Do you think you guys would be able to start thinking about how this could be used by Dr. Angela Jackson and her team and New Profit and others that are working across the country on diversity and inclusion?
So my short answer would be yes, Jemai. I mean, we are all stronger when we can share our experiences and our learnings, right? Both good and bad. And so we would be an open book to share what we've developed, what we've come up with. We've certainly borrowed from other companies. So we're part of Bain Capital's double impact portfolio. Bain Capital, a large private equity company, but they have a social impact fund of which we're a part of. We've been relying on them to feed us other stuff from those other portfolio companies. So absolutely, we would love to share whatever we got.
That is really cool. So Angela, if you want to have a further conversation with Monty, please let me know. I think that's just fabulous. And Michael and Nina, obviously, who are leading the work. Thank you, thank you. Okay, on behalf of the Close-It team, we're at 9:59 in New Mexico. This was inspiring beyond belief. I knew it would be. Thank you, Nina and Michael, for the the ground you're laying for this incredible work. I'm going to be sending out an email with some things that you said, and bravo to you and your leadership, Monty. Just a reminder, next week, my dear friend, Dr. Parminder Jasal, will be leading the session as they launch Unmetal, a startup company, and Marilee Mayo, my other super dear friend who helped start Innovate Educate with me. They are the co-founders of Unmetal, and we're going to have an amazing session on the new platform that they've unveiled to ensure equity and inclusion in both learning and the marketplace. So thanks, everyone. Happy Friday, and bravo.
Thank you, Jemai.
Thank you for having us.